2024 was a pretty interesting year for gaming, to say the least. So from the highs of Black Myth Wukong, Metaphor Refantasio, Palwood, and of course many more, to the lows of Concord, Dragon Age the Veilguard, the whole Sweet Baby Inc. fiasco, and of course anything Ubisoft touched, 2024 was definitely memorable. But if there's one thing that stood out more than ever, it's that studios who are focused on creating great games, memorable experiences, and of course listening actively to player feedback to implement positive change have ultimately been the most successful. And Path of Exile 2 is a game that reinforces this point more than ever. When it comes to studios that truly listen to their players, Grinding Gear Games is in a league of its own. Their philosophy is quite simple. Players aren't just customers, they're partners in shaping the game. And this approach isn't just lip service. Grinding Gear Games actively watches streams, engages with forums, and implements player feedback in real time.
Today I found 2 Mage Bloods. Wait, Path of Exile is in the chat?
Whether it's adjusting balanced systems or rolling out quality of life improvements, their updates reflect what the community actually wants. Now, this is a stark contrast to most AAA studios, where player feedback is either ignored or dismissed as not being part of the vision. But Grinding Gear Games has built an entire culture around responsiveness, and of course the results ultimately speak for themselves. Path of Exile 2 isn't just a sequel to the much-loved original. It's a masterclass in how listening to players can elevate a game to completely new heights altogether. A good example is the revamped skill gem system. In the original Path of Exile, players loved the depth, but people found the game clunky and unintuitive. Grinding Gear Games took that feedback to heart, completely reworking the system in PoE 2, making it more streamlined, but they still retain the same level of complexity that players enjoy. And what's the result of all this? A system that's not only easier to use and understand for newer players, which is really important as a barrier to entry that the old game felt too complicated for, but it also encourages even more experimentation and of course creativity with player builds. This is what happens when studios actively listen to their players and implement changes accordingly. One thing to note, and it's a good comparison to Diablo 4 and their launch, is that the patching process seems really simple and streamlined for Grinding Gear Games. So during the early days of the beta release a few weeks ago, players raised a lot of concerns, with certain mechanics feeling unbalanced, too much looping back through the map, etc. And within days, Grinding Gear Games managed to roll out updates to address most of these concerns. And they've released a few patches since. Now compare this to, of course, Diablo 4's, and if you ever watch their early campfire chats, you will know that there was just excuse after excuse after excuse rolled out as to why they couldn't implement changes, with some of them not coming in or planned to come in until Season 3, and this was before Season 1 even launched. It proves that Grinding Gear Games, of course, is capable of rolling out extensive changes to the game in a short amount of time. Comparatively, the Diablo 4 team just couldn't do it. Now, was that an issue with how the game was built to begin with? Quite possibly. But some of the excuses that they seem to roll out around all the people that had to sign off on patching changes, especially Microsoft and Xbox, seem a bit redundant when Path of Exile 2 is available on the same platforms. Of course, it begs the question, and it seems a pretty simple one to answer. So why does listening to players work so well? Well, obviously it builds trust within your core community, and trust is, of course, everything in the gaming industry. So Grinding Gear Games has cultivated one of the most loyal communities in gaming because players know that their voice matters, and that keeps them actively engaged with the game because they know they'll be listened to. And of course, it's not just about making a great game, it's about building a relationship with the people who actually play it. Larian Studios is another fine example of this as well. Contrast this with Helldivers 2. They had an amazing launch and a huge player base, and they just plummeted in the early days because they made a lot of changes to weapons primarily that players gave feedback about not enjoying the changes and they wanted them reverted, and Arrowhead just refused to do so or took too long, and their player count completely dropped off a cliff. Now they have made some really good significant attempts to reclaim their player base and loyalty, as have Diablo 4 as well. Their player base is climbing too, so credit where credit's due. But it's a really good reminder to these big studios that you need to listen to and value your player feedback, especially in games that aren't competitive. Like, these are balance changes that a game like League of Legends needs to keep the game fair and even and people stop abusing certain champions. These are either single player or cooperative games Does it really matter if a weapon is OP for a little bit of time before it gets a small balance change? Do you really need to nerf dungeons because they're giving out too much XP, like the D4 crew did, and then make the game significantly harder to level up even though you don't have a real end game to work towards? And then wonder why your player count drops. It's really interesting as to why they would do this, but they did, and they obviously saw the player counts drop because of it, which is a great lesson to learn, and a reason that grinding your games has been so successful so far is because this kind of community-driven development ensures the game evolves in ways that resonate with their audience, and it keeps the players invested for years. So it's a strategy that's clearly paid off for grinding your games, and one that studios would do well to emulate for their own games. Now, of course, it is important to note that Path of Exile 2 obviously isn't a perfect game, so even a studio as responsive as grinding your games, of course they have their challenges. You know, high-level players are expressing concerns about things such as after-death effects and probably the overabundance of one-shot mechanics in the game. So, for instance, imagine you're on maps and you're grinding out hours and hours of maps just to get the certain items you need to fight one of the pinnacle bosses. And of course, you die instantly to a one-shot mechanic because you've never seen it before and you need to reattempt that fight multiple times to learn the boss fight patterns. Not a good feeling, especially when you have to grind out for another 5 to 10 hours just to reattempt that fight again. So it is definitely a concern amongst high-level players that this is happening. Grinding your games will probably listen to these concerns, and based off past history, you would expect that some sort of change will be implemented to alleviate that. And for me personally, I hate the multiplayer in this game. It is not very good. It is an absolute mess. There's so many visual effects on screen that you can't tell what's going on half the time. You know, my highest level character is a monk, which is melee, and when I play with friends that are playing sorceress and witch, I can't see what's going on. I get one shot all the time on maps because I can't avoid anything that the monsters and mobs are putting out. Personally, it's something to avoid, but I've played this game for 200 hours now, and I'm still really enjoying it from a single player perspective, more than I ever thought I would. So, and it is important, like I said, to note that this game is in early access, and I think grinding gear games have, of course, earned the trust of its players due to their past history with the improvements and changes that they did with Path of Exile 1, and all these issues are probably going to be addressed before the full release. So there's no concern for me as a player from that perspective. I'm still enjoying it, I'm still loving it, I still play it every day, so happy to sit and wait and see on that one, and of course it will be free to play on full release, so you're not committed financially to something that you might invest a bunch of time into and then find out down the track that there's things you really don't enjoy about it. It's free to play, it didn't cost you anything other than your time. So what's the takeaway here? Well, it's pretty simple. Studios that listen to their players, they will always come out on top. So grinding gear games have proven this time and time again, and Path of Exile 2 is just the latest example of this. So in a year of highs and lows, games like Path of Exile 2 have stood out massively amongst their other big studio counterparts. And they're not just as a great game, but as a great example of what happens when studios respect their audience. And the question is, will other big studios, will they take notice? We'll see. If you got to the end of the video, really appreciate your time. Are you playing Path of Exile 2? Are you enjoying it? I'd love to hear thoughts in the comments, and drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. Bye for now.